Awesome. Welcome everyone to this Tarot Unicorns and Coffee event featuring the wonderful, amazing, brilliant, beautiful Robin Poole. This is Troubleshoot Your Natal Chart Part 1. This is a series on how we can dig into our natal chart and get more information and more guidance, starting with how you can troubleshoot it. So let me just go over the rules for Tarot Unicorn and Coffee events. Number 1, love and light always. Please hold yourself in the highest of love and light. And also everyone else who is coming together to join us for this event, hold them in love and light as well. Rule number 2, don't start no shit, won't be no shit. Respect yourself and respect others. And with that, this event is going to be led and run for the most part by Robin. I do want to mention real quickly, she is offering 10-minute mini readings for this event. She will have some people who have already been queued up and already sent their information, where she will be able to go through their charts and give examples of how this information works in a real life situation. But she's also offering those readings, extending those to all of you if you would like to sign up during this event, or at least hopefully by the end of today while the special is still going. And with that, let's turn it over to Miss Robin Poole.
Thank you. I gotta say, Valerie, your introductions are so good for my self-esteem. Like, you said that, and I'm like, maybe that's why I teach these classes for Valerie, because she just says such nice things about me.
I just speak the truth. I speak it like I see it.
I wanted to read my tea bag wisdom from today. I always make a pot of tea because it calms me down to make a pot of tea for these events. And the tea bag today said, love yourself so that you may know how to live with self-respect. And I was like, that's why I drink that tea. Also because I found it in the cupboard when my husband purchased it at the store. But I'm like, maybe that's what I needed today. So anyway, because I think that a lot of what we're talking about today is about learning to love yourself, especially the areas in your life that maybe don't work as neatly and cleanly. I want to start by saying a couple things. One is that I looked at the replay of the last class I taught, and I was constantly like doing this or doing this with my head and like looking out the window. And somebody said, I wondered, were you like listening to spirit when you were doing that? And the answer is sort of yes, but also I tend to get very nervous when I'm teaching. And I know it doesn't show as much, but it's definitely true. And I have a beautiful view out my window of a river with birds flying by. So sometimes I'm just like looking out, calming myself down, getting back into the flow. So if you see me, my head going around like this, that's what that's about. All right. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is that today we're talking about the topic of troubleshooting your natal chart. And I thought a lot when I figured out this title, because I don't want to suggest to you that your natal chart is trouble or that it is in trouble. And I will say that we're looking at some difficulties that planetary energies can have in your natal chart. And I've never seen a natal chart with more planetary energies that needed help than mine. I have every planet that needs help in my chart. And the first time I saw my chart, I literally burst into tears. So I just want to mention that having planetary energies that need help in your chart does not mean that you are cursed, that you cannot live a good life. Our celebrity example had a very successful life. You'll all recognize this person when I put up this person's photo. And that most of you guys have survived this long in your life without even knowing that you needed to help your planetary energies. So if there are any traumatized or fearful or wounded inner child parts of you who are like, but now we're in trouble, but now our planets are bad, like just don't resist, soothe, calm. One of my astrology teachers named Matthew Merlin says of astrology, you get more points for ticking off the boxes. It's not about being penalized for stuff you didn't know or didn't know to do. The planets aren't up there being like, man, how come you haven't been troubleshooting me? Don't expect any favors from me. Like, it's not like that at all. So this is just like extra information. It's like going into the doctor and discovering that you have a backaches, and the doctor's like, well, I think heating pads would help. And you're like, that's a great idea. I could try those heating pads. But this is more like discovering that maybe there are 5 or 6 areas that might need work. So don't panic. Don't think you have to start with all of them. We're going to do a little invocation and ask our higher selves to help us figure out where to start. But I just want to make sure that we're really coming to this from a positive, like, oh, good information. I can figure out what to do with this now. Spirit and my intuition will help me go forward. And don't give in to any parts of you that are like, uh-oh, here's more stuff I'm not doing. All of that is a trauma response. And that's something to soothe, but it's not something to bring into our working in astrology. And then the second thing I want to say is that when I say work with the planets, I don't mean like the hunk of rock orbiting in space that we have labeled Mercury is now going to fix my life for me. The gaseous ball that we've labeled Jupiter is the source of all of my favors. Some people might think that, and you can think that if you want. I also am not saying this is like the Roman god Jupiter or the goddess Venus, although if you want to work with them as gods and goddesses, you absolutely can. What I see them as is as aspects of divine love and energy. So Venus is the aspect of divine love that's about relationships and harmony and peace. And Mercury is the aspect of divine love that's about communication. And as aspects of divine love, I find they're very willing to work with me and talk to me and give me messages and things like that. But you can figure out what your perspective is on working with planetary energies. And whatever works for you and fits into your belief system, I think is the right way to go. You can just decide it's a psychological thing about your own inner self, and that also will be effective for you. Okay, the last thing I'll say is that these techniques were written down about 2,000 years ago. So people have been doing this for a long time, but they kind of fell out of astrology. So we're bringing back some of these old things. If you have questions about the source, you can always ask me later. Okay, so I think I'm going to start with a kind of an invocation here. We're going to center and ground ourselves quickly, and then we'll get into the class. All right, so I invite you, if you like, to close your eyes or calm yourself. You can sit quietly. Feel your energies settling in and grounding and centering however is convenient for you. If you want to center in your heart, if you want to send your energies down to the earth or up to the sky, if you want to let your aura expand out through the air into an orb around you. And we're going to visualize a box or a basket at your feet and let all your worries go and be put into the box or basket for the duration of our class. If you want any of them back afterwards, you can pick them back up again. But for now, let's be here together. We won't worry about the to-do list or the rest of the day or whatever else might be going on with us. And I'd like to ask Spirit, our divine connection, our higher selves, our intuition to come and help me know what to say and help each of you guys to really take away what's for your highest good, not to get overwhelmed or worry about other people's charts or start thinking about the many things that you now have to do with this information. Astrology unfolds like the opening of a flower. And so we're just going to take it one step at a time. If you don't understand everything today, that is perfectly fine. You can always go back and watch the replay, but also maybe you don't need to understand everything. We're just going to set an intention that whatever is the most important thing for you to get today, that's the place to start. You can always book a reading with me or do more research on your own or let your intuition unfold things over the next, months or years or whatever that is. I'd like to ask for protection, a nice barrier against any negative energies that might be sneaking around us so that we can be safe and secure, feel comfortable asking our questions, learning about ourselves, growing in our knowledge. And I want to ask that we have a beautiful energetic connection with each other here today where we can support each other in love, but that when we leave, all cords will be cut. We won't take away any energy that isn't for our highest good. And we'll all come away feeling more loved, more enlightened, more positive, and that we'll have some good steps for moving forward in whatever way is best for us. I'm just going to give a minute to settle into that. That we're all loved, we're all held in comfort and peace. It's safe to learn about our true selves and express our true selves in this environment. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back. We will get going. All right, everybody feeling tingly? I feel really tingly after stuff like that. Super tingly. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. And is this one? Hello? Yes, it is. I'll be darned. Okay. All right. Can everybody see this? Valerie, is my screen share up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Got it.
Just as a reminder, I cannot see you, anybody, while I'm sharing the screen. And also my internet freezes occasionally for tiny bits of time. So if it freezes, somebody has to tell me that it froze and I'll back up to wherever you lost me. And then if you have questions, you can stick them in the chat or raise your hand. I'm going to stop periodically for questions as we go. Valerie will keep an eye on the chat for me. Okay, so this is what I said about grabbing a free copy of your chart or going to my website, Spirit Said Free Spiritual Resources, and then downloading these keywords. You can do this now. If you like extra information during a presentation, you can also wait and do this later and or do it and then come back and watch the replay if you want to just absorb now and then come and follow along. So I'm going to tell the story of working with one planetary energy and how that has changed things for me. And again, this link is in the chat. The Spirit Said with the free spiritual resources. My website is there, so you can go and take a look at that. So back in the day, this is kind of a picture of how I used to dress myself. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this picture. I'm not being harsh on myself. I don't think I looked bad. All the appropriate parts of me were covered up. But I also have to say that this particular outfit was not what I really wanted to wear to this occasion. And I let somebody talk me into it. I had a whole other idea and she said it wasn't formal enough. What we were actually doing was we were at the White House because my mother was getting an award. And when my mother showed up, I discovered she had dressed like this. And now I think my mother always looks radiant. I think she looks radiant here. But my mother and I are not the same person. And anytime I end up dressing like my mother, I'm like, uh-oh, something is wrong here. So I don't think there's anything wrong with what I was wearing from an outfit perspective, but it did not fit me. And I have a whole childhood issues around what we would call Venus issues. So Venus issues in this case are the issues of appearance, how you dress, feeling safe, looking beautiful. You know, mom didn't grow up wearing any makeup. And I didn't learn how to put on makeup until a mom of my family friend showed me. The first day I showed up at high school, my best friend, who was a lovely person and did not mean anything bad by it, asked me if I had a black eye. That was the only day I wore makeup like in my entire life except my wedding because I was so traumatized by her response. And I had some childhood sexual abuse. And so I didn't feel like it was safe to feel beautiful. I didn't think it was safe to be attractive. I just, bought very minimal clothes and covered everything up. And I realized that I didn't feel safe being attractive. I didn't know how to put on makeup. I didn't know how to feel beautiful. And I wasn't even sure I was supposed to feel beautiful. And then one day the universe decided I needed to work on my Venus energies. And I was approached by a photographer who asked me to model my collection of vintage clothes, which I'd been buying at Goodwill. And I ended up, after many photo shoots and many panic attacks, where I would be driving to the photo shoot and have to pull over because I was having trouble breathing because there were these voices inside of me that were like, it's not safe to feel beautiful. And my photographer is like an older middle-aged, very lovely guy. He's extremely conscientious. He made me feel totally safe, but I was still just having all these panicky moments. And I finally ended up with this photo. And I was looking at this and I was looking at the before and after, and I was like, wow, this is what can happen to you when you work with planetary energies. And all of these clothes came from Goodwill, and I would never have owned anything like, 3-inch heels or these sequin shorts or a see-through shirt. And I sure wouldn't have been modeling for a photo shoot. But I have learned so much about how to feel beautiful and how to feel safe and how to deal with my triggers from putting together these photo shoots. And we've done quite a few of them. And if you go to my website, spiritsaid.com, you'll actually see a bunch more photos. They were all taken by this guy. His name is Michael Weller. He's in Portland, Oregon. I totally recommend him. He's amazing and also very talented and also a lovely person. But I just thought I'd tell this story as an example of what can happen when you start troubleshooting your natal chart. Looking back, I can see that even though I didn't understand astrology, I had a whole host of issues around Venus. And lo and behold, in my chart, Venus needs help. So what we're going to do today, this is part one, is talk about how to figure out what planetary energies need help in your chart. And when I say need help, I mean like, it's not like the planets need help and Venus is having trouble in the sky because of you. And it's not like Venus needs help and if you don't save her, it won't work out. Not like that either. It's much more like these are these aspects of divine love or divine energy that are not expressing themselves smoothly in your chart. Like you may find, oh, I'm a total natural when it comes to cooking or taking care of my home. But boy, I really struggle in communication. You know, or, oh, wow, no, I'm great at work. I always have a great time at work. But when it comes to relationships, then things don't work so well for me. So when it comes to this, things don't work so naturally. That's probably the planetary energy that needs help in your chart. And I asked Saturn at one point, the energy Saturn, about this. And he said, it's a matter of free will. On this planet, you're naturally good at certain stuff. But other things you need to work to get better at. And that's where you get to make that choice. Do I want to work on my relationships? Do I want to work on my, ability to communicate or whatever it is? And he's like, the natal chart tells you what you need to work on and gives you some suggestions for how to do it. So today is the what you need to work on day, and then stay tuned for other installments because Valerie and I are going to be giving many more suggestions about what to do about it. Okay, are there any questions so far?
No, I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, if any questions come up, feel free to stick them in the chat. You can preface it with like question, : put your question in. Valerie will keep track of them. And then when I stop, we'll scoop them up and answer the questions for you. Okay. All right, so basically, there are many ways to look at energetic issues with planets, but we're just going to talk about 3 classical ones today. So these are the 3 things that could be being problematic for your planets. 1, they could be squared or opposed by Saturn or Mars. Now, I'm going to give you examples, so you'll see how to check this out in your chart. But this basically means that they are either 90 degrees or 180 degrees from the symbol that looks like a little male symbol. See the little circle with the arrow here? Or the symbol that looks kind of like an H, which is the symbol for Saturn. So Saturn is the H, Mars is the circle with the arrow. And also they might be conjunct, which means they might be next to. So they're either next to 90 degrees or 180 degrees from the circle with the arrow, Mars, or the H, Saturn. That's one thing. And that means that the challenging energies of Saturn or Mars are affecting that planet and how it expresses itself in your chart. Okay, the second thing that can go wrong is they can be in what I call the hard houses. Now, classical astrology called these the bad houses. The classical astrologers were very comfortable with the idea of good and bad. I personally don't love good and bad so much, so I renamed it hard, but they're basically houses in your astrology chart that relate to difficult life topics like health or inner fears and worries. So planets that are in those houses usually express themselves in positive ways in some aspects, but there can be a tendency for their energy to get drawn into these challenging life areas. So if you have planets in the hard houses, and I'll go through what they are, that's something that might be difficult for them. And then there are certain planets that on the day that you were born might have been in a sign where they don't naturally express themselves. So planets are like people in that sense, where they're naturally more at home in some places than others. You might be the kind of person who feels totally at home in a fancy restaurant, but if we took you into an auto mechanic's garage, you would be like, it's kind of greasy and dirty. Like, is there a safe place for me to sit without ruining my pants? Or maybe you're the opposite. You're totally like at home in nature, but then if we took you to the ballet, you'd be like, I have to be quiet, right? Like, why are they dancing like that? Like, that's not very natural, And planets are like that too. Their energy expresses themselves more naturally in some signs than others. So if you have been born at a time when a planet was in a sign where it wasn't so comfortable, that energy may not express so naturally. And as I said, I have 10 planets that need help. Now, when I say planets, that includes the sun and the moon, which are astronomically not planets, astrologically they count as planets. I've got 10 of these. I've never met anybody or seen any chart that had as many planets that needed help as mine. So yeah, so don't freak out. Don't decide you need to work with all of them. They're not all like, it's not like babies where if you don't feed them right away, they're gonna, something terrible will happen to them. You can work through your planets and signs naturally. And usually it'll become obvious that right now you probably need one or the other, depending on what you're going through in life. And I'm going to do some sample readings at the end of this, and you'll be able to see examples from people's charts of how we look at the planets, how we figure out what needs help. So we're going to do a celebrity example. And then when I start getting into real people, I think this will all make more sense. Plus, of course, you are always welcome to email me or schedule a reading if you have questions, and I will help you figure out your answers, whatever those are. So we're going to start with the Saturn and Mars affliction. That's the technical term. They are afflicted by Saturn and Mars. Saturn is basically like external limitations and loss. And Mars represents like self-created obstacles, like you're your own biggest enemy. You keep making decisions that aren't working for you. Now, this is a real simplification. Again, if you do a reading, we'll get into this in much more detail, but this is a simple way to look at the problems that Saturn and Mars tend to cause in people's charts. Okay, do we have any questions, Valerie, or should I keep going?
Keep going. I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, so problem number one, you could have planets that are conjunct, squared, or opposed by Mars and Saturn. Next to 90 degrees is a square, opposed is 180 degrees from the male symbol or the H. All right, so I'll just mention quickly how this astrology chart works. The signs around the edge here, the colored symbols, these are the actual signs like Aquarius and Leo and Pisces. And these glyphs, they're called in astrology, these symbols around the inner ring represent the planets or other significant points in the chart on the day that this individual is born. And then the things that look kind of like slices of pie, the wedges, those are the houses. And they represent different life areas. And you can see they're numbered around the inner ring. So this would be the first house here. Then this is the second house down here. So the wedges are the houses. They represent life areas. The outer ring is the signs, which is where the planets were in the zodiac on the day this person was born. And then the symbols are the actual planets themselves and their position in the sky at the time of birth. All right, so the first thing you want to do is find your Saturn and your Mars. That's the male symbol for Mars down here, and the H is the symbol for Saturn. It's not really an H. I just call it that because it looks like one, but it has no correlation to the actual letter H. Yeah, okay. All right, so now what we want to do is figure out the planets that are opposite or 90 degrees. And what you can see is this person has this thing that looks like a 4 here, which is the planet Jupiter. And it's more or less opposite the Saturn. You can see it's not exactly opposite. The Saturn is at 0 degrees of Taurus here. And this Mars is at, this Jupiter is at 13 degrees of Scorpio. But still, they're basically opposite each other on the chart. And these are opposite signs to each other. So that's an opposition. Then this person also has a 90-degree angle from the Saturn down to the sun. The sun is this thing that looks like a donut or Homer Simpson's eyeball. So in astrology terms, we would say that this person has Jupiter opposite Saturn and the sun square Saturn. So Jupiter's the 180-degree angle here, and then the sun here is the 90-degree angle. And so what we would say is that Jupiter, which represents abundance and exploration, is opposed by Saturn. And then the sun, which represents energy and charisma, is squared by Saturn. Now, again, this is very simplified. There are a lot of other things that Jupiter and the sun can represent. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, I thought I'd draw it down to a few keywords. So in this person's life, we would say that their ability to generate abundance and their ability to be energized and shine as their true selves, right, to express their own charisma, to shine their light, will be troubled by external limitations. So these negative keywords for Saturn, external limitations, are now negatively affecting their ability to produce abundance and their ability to shine as their true selves. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that that resonates with you guys because they're opposed and squared by Saturn external limitations will become a problem or a challenge in this area of this person's life. Can you give me a yes in the chat if this is, you are following along thus far? Okay. Are we getting some yeses, Valerie?
Yes, we're getting yeses.
All right. Like, wait a second, I can't see the chat. Okay.
We're getting
Now, that doesn't mean that this person will have a terrible life. It doesn't mean they have no energy or charisma. It just means there's a challenge where these particular life aspects, their abundance and charisma, have some problems with these external limitations. All right. And then this person also has a Mars opposition. You can see if we follow this line on the other side of the chart, the person has Neptune. That's this thing that looks like a fork, which really is supposed to represent the trident, the weapon of the sea god. This person has Neptune up in Cancer. So that means that this person will experience the negative Mars effect of self-created obstacles when it comes to Neptune type activities. Now, there are a lot of Neptune activities, but in this case, I picked universal love. Neptune represents our ability to like be part of the cosmic oneness, feel like we are loved and accepted by all humans, to sort of like, put away our petty squabbles and jealousies and accept like the fraternity or the sisterhood of the humankind. But this person probably will have a little bit of trouble really tapping into that, because the opposition with Mars will mean that this person is constantly putting obstacles in their own way that make them feel like they're not connected, or they're not nurtured, or they're not nurturing to others. Now, you might be wondering who this person actually is. Anybody recognize this guy? You can put it in the chat if you know who this person is. Are we getting anyone, Valerie?
Now they're scared to date themselves.
I know,
Yes,
right?
Reagan, they're answering.
Ronald, right? I did not come up with this example because I normally try to pick women or people of color for my astrology examples, but Spirit was very definite that this was the example I needed to use for today. This is Ronald Reagan. He was our president from 1980 to 1988. So as I say, it's not like he had a terrible life and nothing went right for him. He was a famous actor. Before that, he was a spokesperson for, it's like Procter or Johnson & Johnson. Anyways, he was a spokesperson for a famous company. It's not he had a marriage that lasted, he had children. This doesn't mean your life's going to fall apart. You can become president and have problems in your chart. But as we'll see as we go through this, Reagan wasn't a perfect guy and he had some challenges which are very traceable to this. Okay. Anyway, so this is my example. So that's the first thing you want to do with your chart, if you're following along, is find your Mars and your Saturn and look for planets that are opposite. And if you're watching the replay, you can pause this now and take out your chart and circle and square and draw and do whatever it is that you're doing. And if you want to know how this is going to affect you, look up the keywords for whatever planets are affected by Mars and Saturn, and then try applying external limitations to the Saturn planets and self-created obstacles to the Mars planets. Okay. Step 2 in things that can go wrong, and we're just gonna work with Mr. Reagan here, President Reagan, for the rest of this.
Hey,
yeah.
Robin, can you go over that step one more time? Look up what?
Yeah. So figure out what planets are opposed or 180 degrees or 90 degrees or next to your Mars and Saturn. And then if you want to use the keyword charts on my website, remember I gave a link to the keyword charts at the beginning of this. You want to find the keywords for those planets and then see if external limitations are limiting your Saturn planets. And if you are experiencing self-created obstacles around the keywords of your Mars planets. So like Ronald Reagan is going to feel like there are limits to his abundance and his ability to shine as himself, because Saturn's external limitations are affecting his Jupiter and his Sun. So you use the keywords for the planets that are affected. And if they're affected by Saturn, you're looking for external limitations that are affecting those aspects of your life. And if they're affected by Mars, you're looking for self-created obstacles. Like Reagan's going to put some things in his own way that make it hard for him to nurture others, or to feel like he's, like safe in accepting his relationships with like humankind as a whole. Reagan's going to create obstacles to universal love. And he's going to feel like there are outside factors in life that are limiting his abundance and his ability to shine in his own energy and be charismatic. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, so the second thing that can go wrong is that you have planets in houses that are related to challenging life topics. And those are, in case you're wondering, the 2nd, 6th, 8th, and 12th house. And I'm going to go through those here. So the 2nd house, you can see there's just this little number 2. That's how you know it's the 2nd house. Reagan's got quite a few planets in this house. He's got his Mars, then this next one is Mercury, and then he has his Uranus. They're all in the 2nd house. And the 2nd house is associated with materialism. Now, it's associated with a lot of positive things too. It's also associated with your relationship with nature and your love of possessions, and but the challenging bit is that people with a lot of planets in the 2nd house can end up feeling like they always want more. They always need more stuff. This was called the gates of Hades in classical astrology, because it was believed that love of material possessions would prevent you from connecting with divine love. So there can be a sense that you're like very focused on status, or you always have to have the best, or you like you never get paid enough, that sort of thing. So if you have planets in the 2nd house, you want to make sure that you're not letting concerns about material life derail your enjoyment of this life or your pursuit of other topics as well. It's not wrong to be concerned about possessions. Like, you need money to live. But if you find like, wow, I'm thinking about that a lot, or I'm worried about it, or I'm obsessed by it, then you might want to dial that back. Okay, the next house is the 6th house. You can see on the right here, we have our little darker blue arrow, and Reagan's got a bunch of stuff in here too. He has his Saturn and his moon, and then this upside down horseshoe thing is your north node, which is like your life lessons in this life. And the 6th house is a house that's associated with work and health. Now, you might not think that that's bad necessarily, but if you have a lot of planets in the 6th house, you can become kind of like a workaholic, or you're obsessed with work, or you feel guilty if you're not working, or you're always thinking about work. And the same thing is true of health. It has to do with like daily health and like, chronic health issues. And so if you have a lot of planets here, you might be worried about your health, or you might be somebody who's like, oh no, I missed a day at the gym, and now bad things are going to happen to me. And so the 6th house is really a house where, we need work. We need to work. And health is really important. But again, you don't want to let it get like too overwhelming or too intense. So if you have planets there, make sure that you're not getting drawn too much into those where you're worried about them, you're spending all your time working, or other important people in your life are like, well, mom's always at work, or dad's always thinking about work, and there's not enough time for family or relationships. All right, the next house, the 8th house, you can see there's a little number 8 right here, the purple arrow. Reagan's got another one. And the 8th house is associated with shadow work, taboos, the need for earning a lot of money. And so if you have planets in the 8th house, then you may find that you are kind of like drawn to like trauma or taboo subjects like alternative sexuality that's not necessarily mainstream, or you love horror movies. But it can also be like, I had a lot of trauma in my life and now I want to be my true self, but I always feel like people are against me. The 8th house is a place where like, it's like who you are starts to butt up against your world, your society, your conditioning. And so there are like authority figures that told you that there was something wrong with you, or you're like, oh, I really want to be a witch, but I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household and I feel guilty about that. There can be a sense where you're really drawn to these intense topics like, mental illness or misdiagnoses and things. And it can be a little bit intense. And also our society is very like love and light. I'm fine. You're fine. Look at all the beautiful pictures of us on social media. And so if you're drawn to these darker topics or more challenging things have happened to you, you can feel kind of like isolated or afraid to express who you really are. So if you have planets in the 8th house, you really have to make peace with all parts of yourself and find ways where you can express all those parts. And maybe it's not at work, right? Or maybe it's not with your fundamentalist Christian family, but there's really a sense of doing that sort of underworld work where you're bringing out deep issues into the light and acknowledging them for yourself and healing from them. So if you have planets in the 8th house, that's probably a big part of what you're doing in this particular lifetime. And then the final house that's hard is over here on the left. It's the 12th house. Once I saw Reagan's chart, I realized why Spirit had picked him as an example for this class. Because I'm like, wow, he really illustrates a lot of this stuff. The 12th house is associated with inner fears and worries and also hidden enemies. So if you have planets in the 12th house, on the plus side, it also gives you a great inner world. It's great for talking to spirit. People tend to have a lot of imagination. You're never bored because you've always got stuff going on between your ears. But it also can devolve into this sort of like fear of, I'm not good enough, something's wrong, people are attacking me. It can be associated with hospitalizations. And also the sense that like, you never feel safe, you never feel secure. And we're going to see when we start looking at Reagan's life that actually fears, he was constantly worried about enemies and constantly worried about people who were supposed to be, supposedly attacking him or working against him. He had all of this stuff. So if you have planets in the 12th house, you can enjoy that vibrant inner world and all your imagination and talking to spirit, but you have to make sure that you're reining it in and not letting those inner fears or paranoia run away with you, because it can be really kind of intense. Reagan has a problem here because Jupiter should be a very positive planet for him, but it's in this really challenging house. And so that's partly why his abundance is a little bit challenged, in addition to being opposed by Saturn. So yeah, okay. So again, I'm not saying that these houses are really negative, that everything terrible will happen to you if you have planets in the houses. I have planets in several of these houses, and they are sources of abundance and joy. But it does take a little work sometimes to bring out the abundance and joy in these planets, because they can have a tendency to express in ways that can be challenging or difficult. Okay, any questions? Stop for questions as we move along.
No questions. I am seeing a comment that says Reagan's wife, Nancy, was really into astrology big time. That's interesting.
She totally was. Yeah. And it was interesting that I did not get asked to do Nancy Reagan's chart as an example. So I know that Nancy used the chart to get her husband to schedule things. Like they weren't allowed to go places on Air Force One on like the wrong day. But this particular stuff that we're doing here, which is called astrological remediation, the troubleshooting your chart, was not a thing back then, really. It's more modern. It's come up in the last 20 years or so as we've started to translate some of these old texts. So I don't think that Reagan had this done for his chart. He doesn't sound to me like somebody who was aware of these challenges, because they seem to have kind of run rampant in his life. But yes, I think his wife did use astrology, especially for scheduling. That's what she was really big for that with. Okay. All right. So those are the first two things that can go wrong, right? Squared or opposed or conjunct by Mars and Saturn. And then planets in hard houses, right? We're now going to get to the third thing that can go wrong, which in some sense is the most challenging thing, but it's also a little bit more complicated. So I saved it for last because there's a long slide. And this is planets that are in signs where they don't express themselves easily. So remember when I said that Venus is kind of like the ballerina? This is a gross simplification, but to make it easy, Venus is like the ballerina, beauty, grace, harmony, balance. And Aries is kind of like the blacksmith shop where you fight hard and work hard and get all sweaty to hammer new material out of new items out of raw material. And if you took Venus into the blacksmith shop, the ballerina into the blacksmith shop, you can imagine that she would feel not super at home, right? Her tutu's going to get dirty. Her beautiful lace and ribbon toe shoes are going to get torn up by the rough dirt floor in the blacksmith shop. Ballerinas do get sweaty, but it's not supposed to show. It's just kind of a mismatch. So that's kind of the analogy for what this is like. So from an astrological standpoint, here's how this works. Now we know that all of the planets rule a certain sign. So each sign has a planetary ruler, sometimes two planetary rulers, that kind of match up. It's like you would expect to see, the ballerina in the opera house, and you would expect to see the blacksmith in the blacksmith shop. And so in this case, for Reagan, we have the sun, which rules Leo. Leo is a sign of charisma, of shining your light, of entertaining others, of expressing yourself creatively. And the sun is all about shining and bringing joy and entertainment to others. So the sun rules Leo. This is Leo. This is supposed to be the lion's mane, this like upside down hoopy thing. That's the lion's mane. But you can see that Reagan does not have his sun in Leo. He has his sun opposite. And that's what we call detriment here. When the sun or any planet is in a sign that is opposite its rulership. See how there's 180 degrees, right? The sun really wants to be in Leo. It expresses itself its best up here in Leo, but it's not. It's actually 180 degrees from that. And that means the sun, Reagan's charisma and energy, is not expressing itself as cleanly as it could or as naturally as it could. Now, I was pretty surprised to see this because, you know, Reagan was an actor and he was known for being very charismatic. And I'm like, how is it that Reagan didn't, you know, I think he was charismatic. But then I learned more about his life and I realized there were some barriers, external limitations, because it's squared by Saturn, to his charisma. And we're going to investigate those. But that's basically how it works. When your planet is opposite the sign that it rules, then it's in detriment. And actually every planet has another sign where it's also at home. It's got a sign it rules. And then it's got a sign of exaltation where it doesn't rule that sign, but it's still pretty darn happy. It's like, imagine going vacationing on like your favorite place to be. And if it's opposite that sign, it also is in detriment, or it's also in, it's in fall. So detriment is opposite the rulership. Fall is opposite the exaltation. And I have a handy list for you guys. Here's the list. So we're going to go through this. I know there's a lot of material on this list. Most of this does not apply to all of you. This is really here so that when you come back and watch the replay, you can stop and you can go through all of your planets and figure out if you have any of the planets are here on the left-hand side, in these signs of detriment or in their sign of fall. Now, I have to tell you that when you pull up an astrology chart on the web, the signs are not going to be the same color. These little colors. So it's like this is the sign of Capricorn here. This little Capricorn sign is purple, and that's what we have in Google Slides. But in the actual chart, it's probably going to be green because Capricorn is an Earth sign. So don't look for the color. Look for the like little squiggly thing. Or Sagittarius is the arrow with the arrow with the crossbar. Pisces is this thing that looks kind of like a sideways H. You know, Aries is the little V, which is the ram's face, and Scorpio is the M with the tail on it. So if you're looking at your chart, don't worry about the color, just take a look. I'm going to go through this, but don't feel like you have to absorb this all. If you want to email me, I will send you a copy of this slide and you can always take a look. Or if you want, you can look on the internet and just type in your search engine. You can type in list of planets in detriment or fall, and it will all come up. And I'll also mention that I only did the 7 classical planets here. I did not do Neptune, Pluto, or Uranus. Yeah, I didn't do those because this is really a classical technique, but there are detriment and falls for those guys as well. And you can look up those planets too if you like. Okay, so what I wrote here is kind of what you need to do if you have your planet in the sign. So if you have the moon in Capricorn, I do, moon in Capricorn, that means your moon, you need help nurturing and getting in the flow. If you have your moon in Scorpio, you need help maintaining optimism and comfort. So these are the things you want to do in your life or ask spirit for, or ask your family members for support for, if you have the planet in these signs. If you have Mercury in Sagittarius, you need help becoming more focused and less scattered. If you have Mercury in Pisces, you need more help being a critical thinker in a positive sort of way, like not being so just like accepting and flowy and gullible, but more like, all right, let me get my brain together and figure this out. And you can see, by the way, there's sometimes overlaps where detriment and fall are the same. So Mercury is detriment in Pisces, and it's also in fall in Pisces. Okay, if you have Venus in Aries, you need help enjoying others and balancing out all the hard work, more beauty and harmony in your life and balance. If you have Venus in Scorpio, you need help being more creative and lightening up. Scorpio can be a very sort of heavy sign with a lot of drama and trauma, and you need help lightening up and having more fun. Oh yeah, if you have Venus in Virgo, you need help having more fun while still being practical. Venus in Virgo can get very focused on problem solving for other people. And so you need to make sure that you're still being creative and joyful and experiencing the lightness of life while practically solving those problems. If you have the sun in Aquarius, and this is what Reagan had, you need to make progress and enhance your community by shining individually. The sun in Aquarius can get very focused on like making progress and moving forward and what needs to happen. And it can lose that sense of, you know, I'm just going to enjoy being myself at the same time. If you have the sun in Libra, you need to enjoy shining in relationships. And don't be so uptight about the rules of what's harmony. Libra can be like, well, it has to be this way, it has to be organized, it has to be neat, it has to be attractive. And if you have the sun in Libra, you might need to just loosen that up a bit and enjoy shining as yourself more. If you have Mars in Taurus, then you need to work on the short term for comfort in the long term. Mars and Taurus can have a tendency to only want short-term comfort, like a comfy bed or good food. You might have to discipline yourself to really plan for the long term there. If you have Mars in Libra, you need to see individuality as a route to relationships. It's like Mars wants to just be itself and express itself and do its own thing and fight for what it believes in. And you might need to kind of work that into achieving balance with other people. And if you have Mars in Cancer, you need to fight to express your emotions and protect those who need healing. Mars in Cancer can have a tendency to be sort of like you want to help people, but you end up hurting them, or you end up saying things that are harsh, or like you're not sure how to fight for yourself because you end up trampling on others. And so Mars in Cancer needs to fight for emotional things and to protect rather than just expressing. If you have Jupiter in Gemini, you need to expand and explore while seeking information. Don't get focused only on the details. You got to get out there and explore new territory. And Jupiter in Virgo needs to see the details as a route to the big picture. Don't just get focused on problem solving or doing things in the immediate sort of way, but make sure you're getting the 30,000 foot level as well. And also that you're having enough fun, because Virgo can be very hardworking and practical, and Jupiter wants to have fun and enjoy life. And if you have Jupiter in Capricorn, you want to use your structure and planning to enhance exploratory activities. So don't just get into building what's conventional or what you've always built. Make sure that you're pushing the envelope, looking out for new things, expanding your horizons, and not just consolidating what you already have. If you have Saturn in Cancer, you need to nurture through release and dissolving. Saturn is a lot about like letting go, moving on from stuff. And Cancer can have this tendency to be very sentimental and want to hold on to things. Oh, but my grandmother knitted this sweater for me. Oh, but I only have 10,000 pictures of my mom. I can't possibly put this one away. Like, learn to let go, and that you're nurturing yourself by releasing things that you don't need anymore. And then if you have Saturn in Leo, you've got to let loose and express yourself and have fun. Saturn can be kind of conservative and want to just like, you know, think about what you're letting go of or destroying things. And you need to have more fun if you got Saturn in Leo. And then if you have Saturn in Aries, you have to use your individuality to make the most of loss and dissolution. So you're going to be losing stuff, but then you got to figure out, where am I going from there? How am I going to grow? What am I going to do next? And don't get sucked into the like, now I feel sad because I don't have this stuff anymore. It's like, make sure you're really using your momentum to move forward. Okay, that's the quick, super quick description of detriment and fall. Does anybody have any questions at this point about what I said or about how to identify this in your chart?
Yes, there is a question in chat.
Mm-hmm.
It says, so if a planet is not in one of the falls or detriment signs, does that mean that it's exalted and happy? No.
So thank you for asking that question. So if we go back to the previous slide, we can see that the planet is, it has a ruler sign, which in the sun's case is Leo. And then it has an exalted sign. And I forget where the sun is exalted. It might be Aries. I think it might be exalted in Aries. So it's got a ruler sign, and then it has an exalted sign. And then the opposite of that, it has a detriment sign, Aquarius, and a fall sign here. And every other sign is kind of like neutral. So the planets usually have 2 positive signs that they're extra good in, and they have 2 challenging signs that they're not really good in. And then they've got 8 other signs that are kind of like, well, I'm fine here. It's not great for my energy, but it's not terrible for my energy. So that's a little bit like, running errands at the store where you're like, well, I don't love the store, but I don't hate the store, or maybe you go visit family in a city where you're like, well, I don't really love the city they live in, but I'm visiting here and it's really just fine. So you got 2 happy signs, that's exalted and rulership, and 2 challenging signs, that's detriment or fall. And then you got 8 basically neutral signs. Did that answer your question? And are there any others?
That was perfect. That was Anna's question. And did we have a question from Grace? Grace, if you want to go ahead.
What if you have signs that are in mutual reception? Does that change the relationship at all?
So I'll just explain what mutual reception is for anybody who doesn't know. It's a really good question. So mutual reception basically means like you have, like, let's say that Reagan here had Saturn up in Leo. Saturn rules Aquarius. So that would mean that basically you have the ruler of one sign in the ruler of one sign in another sign, and then vice versa. That was terrible. But it's like one planet is in the sign of another planet's rulership, and then the other planet's in the exact sign of that first planet's rulership. So if he has Saturn up in Leo, they're mutually reception. And it's basically like they're vacationing in each other's houses. It's kind of like they did a house swap. You're at your friend's house and your friend has come to live at your house. So mutual reception typically means that the planets work better together. So it'll improve the relationship, but it still doesn't get rid of the effects of having a planet that's in fall or in detriment. So it's kind of like, well, they're still not feeling in a super comfortable place, but like things are a little bit better, or they function a little bit better. And I would still do planetary remediation for that planet if you need help in those life areas, even if it is in mutual reception. The other effect it can have is it means that those two houses that the planets fall in, often those life areas are tied together. So if one is in your house of identity and the other is in your house of work, that means you probably have to find a work or a job that really like expresses your identity. You can't just do any old job. It's got to come from who you authentically are. So you may have a tie between the life topics of those 2 houses. But again, that's not mitigated by having it in detriment or fall. You still need help expressing those energies properly. Great question. Technical astrology question. Okay.
One more actually. Do you really think of fall or detriment as one worse than the other, or are they both pretty equal in your opinion?
So in my experience, technically detriment is supposed to be even quote unquote worse than fall. But what I find when I look at people's charts is that there are usually so many other more external additional factors that distinction is not necessarily important unless that's the only distinction. So like, for example, we might say, oh, it's in fall, which is not as bad as detriment, but it's also in a hard house. Or, oh, but this one's also squared by Mars or Saturn. So I think that you could say that technically detriment is supposed to be worse, but when I look at people's charts and we start talking about their lives, usually the situation is more complex than that. And it's not super helpful to say, well, this one is really much worse than the other, because that has to do with the rest of the chart and also how they were brought up and what happened to them as a kid and how those are expressing. Also a good question. Anything else?
Yes, in chat, there's a question. Is there a detriment? That is the, I'm sorry, Grace. I should have waited to see if you were done. Was that good, Grace? Were you done?
Yeah, I was finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question from chat. Is there a detriment that is the worst of all and an exaltation that is the best of all?
So in my experience, no. But I will say that the sun and the moon tend to be major players in people's lives. All the planets are kind of major players in people's lives, but especially the sun and the moon are like big players. So I wouldn't say that having like the sun's detriment is worse than Venus's detriment, except that you may be more affected by it because of the big effect that the sun and the moon tend to have on everybody. But I also, and I don't know who asked this, and I don't want to say anything judgmental, you know you, but I just want to say that when we say things like, which one is the worst? I would ask you to ask why did I ask that question? Why am I asking the question? And this may not be true for you, but when I ask that question, I often am like, am I the worst? What if I have the worst? Or maybe I'm thinking about somebody and I'm like, man, that guy is so annoying. I bet he has the worst, you know? And one thing I've really learned from spirit through astrology actually is that everybody's got their own like worsts and bests. Everybody has their challenges. Everybody has their strengths. You don't win any brownie points for having the worst challenges or the best strengths. You might think, oh, my challenge is the worst, but maybe if you had somebody else's challenge, you'd be like, wow, this was actually a lot worse than theirs. And so I feel like the main thing to do is not to think of this in terms of like worst or best, but rather in terms of like, you know, exaltations and rulerships are like strengths that you have. And detriment and fall is like challenges that, as Saturn said to me, you get to exercise your free will to improve in these areas. And I think of detriment and fall as like the spiritual gym. You know, you don't go to the gym and be like, man, I'm the worst, and that's why I have to lift weights and run on the treadmill. It's like, no, the gym is challenging. The weights are hard. The treadmill is exhausting. But I do that because I want to become stronger and live a long and healthy life and develop skills. So it's like, you know, these are areas where spirit is like, okay, time for you to do some work and learn and grow, because you are deciding what kind of life you want to live on this planet. So you can ask questions about best and worst, but you might want to look inside yourself and make sure there isn't some part of you that's like invested in either thinking of something as worst or being the worst yourself, or thinking that other people are worst, or afraid, like, what if I am the worst? Okay, that was a soapbox moment, but thank you for asking that question. That was good.
Well, okay. Got another question for you. You ready for it?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Misha has a question, and I'm so glad you asked this question, because I had this question and then I forgot it. So how do retrogrades fit in? And I'm assuming she has a planet in retrograde in one of these trouble areas.
Right, okay. So first I'll say that retrograde planets typically in a natal chart mean that you are thinking about the past with this planet's energies affects your view of the past, digging up stuff from the past, or maybe they have to do with things like the re-words, like reevaluating, reconsidering, reanalyzing, recognizing. There's sort of like a contemplative learning, drawing lessons from aspect to retrograde planets. And it has nothing to do with whether they're in a hard house, in detriment or fall, or squared by Mars or Saturn. Now, if your Mars or Saturn are retrograde, you might find that the external limitations of Saturn or the self-created obstacles of Mars take on the flavor where they have to do with the past. So like maybe Saturn in retrograde, you might grow up in a family where they're like, well, that's not our legacy or tradition. That's not the way grandma did it. Because that's like the limitation that Saturn is posing has to do with going back into the past, or like being part of a long lineage. Or maybe if you have Mars retrograde, you might find that the obstacles you create are things like, well, that's not how my grandma said I should do it. Or I'm afraid to do things in a new way. Or, well, I have to think about it a lot and really reconsider everything before I can move forward. So those obstacles have to do with retrograde concepts of looking back on the past, or contemplating, or getting stuck in analysis. But in general, whether a planet is in retrograde or not doesn't have any impact on whether it's in detriment or fall, in a hard house, or squared by Mars or Saturn. So if you're not sure how retrograde affects this, it's completely safe to just ignore that for the purposes of working with the planetary energies and identifying problem planets. All right, did that answer your question?
Yes and no. I'm just beyond confused as a whole right now, so I'm not gonna. Yeah, we'll just continue on, and I'll talk to you later.
All right, sounds good. Especially if you're confused, don't worry about the retrograde. That's like, and I'll just make a point here about, remember at the beginning when I said my intention anyway, that we all will come out knowing what's like understanding what's for our own highest good. So,
well, I just saw this and I've looked at my chart before and it's Venus retrograde and I read it now and I'm like, oh, well, shit, that makes perfect sense. Now that explains a whole heck of a lot. And it's in Taurus, which that's my sun sign. So yeah. Now for my highest good, yes. So that's, it's making a whole lot of sense for me now. So even though I'm confused.
Okay.
So thank you.
Well, that's the point I'm making. It's perfectly fine to be confused. Like people have been working on astrology, literally Western astrology, people have been working on it in this form for 2,000 years. Like there's no way to not be confused at some point. Everybody is confused at some point in astrology because it's so vast. So all you have to do is find the part that's working for you now, and then ask spirit or your higher self to figure out the confusing part when it becomes important. But don't like let the confusing part distract you from the part that is making sense. So I'm glad you found something that makes sense. And Venus, by the way, is really happy in Taurus. So good for you. Yeah. Okay. Any other
Is it happy? Is it happy in Taurus if it's retrograde though?
Yes, that's my point. The retrograde has no impact on whether it's happy or not.
Okay.
Now, it does mean that there's some extra challenges that come with a Venus retrograde that I described, but the Taurus part is not the problem. The Taurus part, Venus rules Taurus. It loves Taurus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Huh?
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yes, we do have another question. I do want to mention, if you're confused, you can still get one of the mini readings. It'll be a 10-minute reading where Robin will be able to look at your chart and answer some of these specific questions for you. I'm dropping that information into the chat again. And we do have another question, which is, do degrees make a big difference?
So the degrees make no difference when it comes to detriment or fall or being in a hard house. They make no difference for that. The degrees do make a difference when it comes to being squared or opposed by Saturn or Mars. So what we can see here, like if we look at Reagan's chart, we can see that his Saturn here is at 0 degrees and his Jupiter is at 13 degrees. So that means that these really aren't 180 degrees apart. If his Jupiter were also at, let's see, if his Jupiter were also at 0 degrees up here, that would be like directly 180 degrees. And it's usually a more intense effect. So the closer they are to exactly 180 degrees or exactly 90 degrees apart, the more intense the effect is. But there still will be an effect just because they're in opposite signs here. So that's where the degrees make a difference. But for detriment or fall, or for being in a hard house, you don't have to worry about the degrees at all. Okay. I want to finish up our little analysis of reading here because I want to start doing readings for people. And then we'll see if we can get to some more questions. Okay. All right. So if we look at Reagan, we're just going to look at Reagan's Jupiter, right? We know that his Jupiter was in the 12th house, which has to do with fear of enemies. It was opposed by Saturn, which causes, the opposition causes this extremes of limitation and permission, external limitations happening to him. And it's squared by his detriment sun, which has to do with trouble shining comfortably. So his Jupiter has racked up a bunch of issues here from an astrology perspective. It's in a difficult house, it's opposed by Saturn, and it's squared by a planet that's in detriment. And as I say, I was surprised by this because I thought of him as a very successful person because he was an actor and he was president. But then I started reading about him. And it turns out that this was from an article that was talking about, I think I typed in like Reagan's paranoia and I found a whole bunch of stuff about that. So if you know anything about his presidency, he was very afraid of other communist countries, the USSR, Iran, Nicaragua. He was described as having poisonous fears. He constantly felt like America was under threat from the communists. And he had this very like narrow idea that American capitalism was the only way. It's not a sort of like expansive. Jupiter should be about like, being inclusive, investigating new things. It's a very comfortable, relaxed energy. But his Jupiter was like worried and it was very narrow. It was like, no, the way we do things is the only way that we can do it, right? Opposed by Saturn. So he's got these external limitations. He thought that Medicare was a Stalinist plot. He supported the fascists to defeat the communists. So there was this tendency to use these like extreme measures in order to quote unquote keep America safe, despite the fact that actually I think it was his second campaign slogan was morning in America. And he had this very like grandfatherly positive sort of image, but then he kept swinging to these extremes of like claims of being attacked and supporting these really extreme political organizations in other countries. And I was surprised by this idea that Reagan had trouble shining comfortably because I always associated him with, you know, his acting career. But he also had a persecution complex. He was convinced that John F. Kennedy and the government had destroyed his public relations and movie career, and that's why he stopped getting movie roles, because somehow John F. Kennedy, the president, and Reagan wasn't the president at that point, he was just an actor, but he was convinced that these people were against him and that he had all of these enemies. So Jupiter, which should have been a really positive planet for him, because it's a positive planet for everybody, because it was in a hard house, because it was opposed by Saturn, because it was squared by this detriment sun, he didn't experience the relaxed sort of abundant feeling that you want to get from Jupiter. And instead he worried about these enemies and he became extreme and he was feeling like he was constantly attacked and he wasn't able to shine because the government was against him. And this is what can happen to you when you have a planet and you don't really realize that those energies need help, because all of these negative things start to become your reality. And so that's partly what we're trying to avoid by understanding our natal chart, is being able to step back and say, okay, it's not true that everybody hates me. It's not true that I always fail at every job I have. You know, it's not true that I'll never be able to have a good relationship. I can work with the planet in this chart in order to loosen up these energies, help them flow more smoothly, and start to improve my experience in that life area. So what you do, and this is what Valerie and I are going to be talking about in our next classes, is what can you do once you've identified the house, the planets that need help. What can you do to work with them better? Well, we're going to be talking about crystals. We're going to be talking about rituals, communing with planetary energies, giving charity to associations that are related to the planets. These are all ways that you can help this energy loosen up. So like if you had Jupiter, you could look at the crystals for Jupiter and start working with those. You could do a ritual or create a Jupiter altar. My favorite is to commune with the energy of Jupiter and meditate on abundance, openness. And then you could also give money to Jupiter organizations like higher learning institutions or think tanks, which have to do with Jupiter energy. So come on to the subsequent classes. And once you've identified your planets, we'll tell you how to work with them. And so here's my suggestion for what to do for you going forward. So step 1 is to identify the afflicted planets. Step 2 is to assemble the keywords that have to do with them and think about how you want that energy to be better in your life. Pick a couple, don't work with them all. They're fine, they don't need you right away. Just pick a few, 1 or maybe 2. And then ask, how do I want to experience this Venus energy more smoothly, comfortably, or abundantly? And then make a plan to change something. I want to experience more Venus energy comfortably and abundantly. So I'm going to wear a Venus crystal around my neck. And the next time I talk to my mom on the phone, I'm going to meditate on Venus energy for 5 minutes before the phone call, like that. Just start small, take baby steps, and ask the universe and your higher self to help increase the positive flow of this energy in your life. All right, I'm going to pause one last time here for questions, and then we'll jump into the actual readings for those of you who paid for them. Anybody asking anything?
There was some questions about if you have an alternate form of payment, and I just instructed them to go ahead and email you directly to discuss that. Is that good for you, Robin? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, for those of you who didn't sign up for a reading today, once you contact me, I will send you a link to my calendar and you can pick a time and schedule a time for the reading. Okay, that was a good question. Anything else?
Not seeing anything. Okay. No raised hands.
I will just mention quickly. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I said I think we're good.
I will mention quickly that working with these energies, you know, this is probably new for most of you. It was brand new for me when I started doing it. And there was definitely like a trial and error period. I found out that I did better if I just chose one planet and stuck with that for a couple months. I also found it very triggering because, of course, there was a reason these energies weren't working well in my life. And as I say, all 10 planets needed help in my life. There was a reason they weren't working well. And like, there was like, you know, like this photo shoot stuff. I had no idea how to put on makeup for a photo shoot. I'm not sure this makeup is perfect anyway, but like there was a big learning curve. I'm not great at styling my hair. Like, you know, walking around in a 3-inch heels was like a big, yeah. So, you know, just be patient and kind with yourself and make time for those moments when you end up feeling triggered, because it will probably bring up things that you need to heal. Like I was very afraid to talk to the energies of the planets. I was like, what if they don't like me? What if I make a mistake? What if they get mad? You know, what if I work with them and then I forget and then they're like, well, you neglected me. Like there was all kinds of fears that came up. So just be patient with yourself. They are very safe and generous if you're interacting with aspects of divine love. And if you need some help with that, feel free to email me and we'll talk it over. Okay. Thank you guys for coming and listening. And I hope this is as transformative for you as it has been for me. And we're gonna move on to the readings. Sorry, these are some extra missing slides that I did. Okay.
Robin,
do we have Jay? Oh, yeah.
Do you want me to go ahead and stop the recording as you go into
Yes.
the personal readings? Okay.
Yes. Sorry, thank you.
All right, so just for those of you who might be watching this recording at some moment in the future, be sure to check the comment section of this recording for information on how you can receive a reading from Robin. If the link for this mini reading specific to troubleshooting your natal chart is no longer active, that just means you are participating and joining us from way, way far into the future. But Robin's readings, her normal readings, are still available at spiritsaid.com. So thank you so much for joining us either live or for this recording. We're going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
Great.